Okay, well, look, let's move on then and bring Vanessa back onto the program. And Vanessa, let's start with the United Nations Security Council.
Yes, well, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, sad news, really, in the sense that the UN Security Council has now adopted the US resolution on Trump's Gaza peace scam, as I call it. Now, of course, what this plan, we've covered the plan itself in previous news programs, but effectively what it does is to kick Palestinian statehood down the road while enforcing international occupation with Tony Blair involved. Effectively, it's a criminal project to further reduce the territory within Gaza that is under the control of the Palestinians. And of course, it relies upon the disarmament of the resistance factions, including Hamas. The resistance military factions have put out a very strong statement saying that they reject the plan entirely. But the furor, particularly on social media, has been over the abstention by Russia and China. And of course, this is reminiscent, as many analysts pointed out, of their abstention back in 2011 over the Libya no-fly zone, which, of course, as we now know, didn't end very well for former President Muammar Gaddafi or for Libya itself, which has now plunged into terrorist vacuum with effectively all powerful nations involved in capturing Libyan resources and territory. So first of all, I also want to point out what I consider to be a split in the statements being made on the diplomatic scene, particularly by Russian representatives. So this is from Vasilina Bensia after the abstention. The full statement will be in the show notes, but he does actually say it is reminiscent of colonial practices and the League of Nations British mandate for Palestine when the opinion of Palestinians themselves was not taken into account. And that's a very important point. Many people are arguing that Arab states and Palestinian authorities themselves also approved the plan, but we're talking about Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, who's known to be a stooge of the Zionist entity and is generally hated by the majority of Palestinians who support resistance against the increasing occupation and expansion, particularly of the settlers in the occupied territories. But then we have Kirill Dmitriev, who's, of course, the special envoy of Putin, educated in Stanford and Harvard, connected to Davos and the WEF. Very strange and really rather shadowy history to this guy who's been heavily promoting relations between Russia and the United States and pushing Trump's monarchist origins, which is another odd factor in his discourse on social media. But here, effectively, he posts a video with Trump basically thanking Russia and China for abstaining, which again is an odd position to take when one considers the statement from Vasilina Bensia. So what I want to do is look at the events that led to this abstention. I'm certainly not going to come up with any smoking gun evidence of what I'm looking at, but I just want to look at those events because I think it's important to take note of them. So first of all, of course, we had the visit from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia originally, of course, was created by the British alongside the UAE, effectively as an extension to the Zionist entity in the region. So Israel, effectively, this was reported in Axios, wants Trump to condition the F-35 sale to Saudi Arabia on Israel normalization. So we have the state of Israel effectively telling the US how they should do business with Saudi Arabia. That's number one. And secondly, I want to show this video between Trump and Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. And this is another clue as to what was going on behind the UN Security Council resolution.
Today and tomorrow, we're going to announce that we are going to increase that $600 billion to almost $1 trillion of investment, real investment and real opportunity by details in many areas. And the agreement that we are signing today in many areas in technology, in AI, in rare earth materials, magnet, etc. That will create a lot of investment opportunities.
So you are doing that now. You're saying to me now that the 600 billion will be 1 trillion.
Definitely, because what we are signing, it will facilitate that. And
I like that very much.
Now, that's interesting when one looks at some of the commentary again on X. This is Dr. Russell McGregor, and he points out there is a reason that President Trump met MBS on the day that the Epstein files were proceeding through the House and Senate. And now, of course, unanimously, House and Senate have insisted on the release of the Epstein files. And it's now on Trump's desk for him to basically agree to that. So Zionists have threatened, according to McGregor, to tank the U.S. economy, if the Epstein files are released. And therefore, the 1 trillion from Saudi Arabia is extremely important to maintain stability in the U.S. economy. Just a theory that I think is worth considering. And then, of course, Saudi Arabia has been very keen on guarantees from the United States regarding the defense assistance that the U.S. has traditionally provided to Saudi Arabia. And here, Trump elevates Saudi Arabia to a major non-NATO ally status. So perhaps they've now achieved that reassurance and those guarantees from the United States in return, possibly, for their vote at the UN. Then, interestingly enough, the Western elected regime in Syria foreign minister, Assad al-Shaibani, was recently in China. Now, up until now, China has actually basically not recognized the Syrian government. This comes after Giuliani's visits to Moscow, to the White House, to the UK, to France, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. In other words, he's been making the rounds and having backroom meetings with Israel over the security in the south. And here we have Shaibani in China almost immediately after the visit to the UK and the US, talks on economic cooperation. So China gets a foothold back in Syria with regards to the Belt and Road Initiative and counterterrorism. To some degree, China then gets reassurances from Giuliani's regime. Uyghur terrorists will be sent back to China rather than being allowed to circulate in the region and potentially pose a risk to China. So China benefits also just prior to the abstention. Then, very interestingly, on the 15th of November, Putin initiated a phone call with Netanyahu to discuss the Middle East, which included discussions on both Syria and Gaza. 2 days later, a Russian military delegation turns up in Damascus and is filmed touring the south of Syria. That comes immediately after the phone call between Netanyahu and Putin and just before Russia's abstention at the UN, allowing the Trump bill or resolution to go through. Now, perhaps more disturbingly, with the passing of this bill, effectively what has now happened, it's given a green light to Israel. This was last night here in Lebanon. It was a Palestinian or is a Palestinian refugee camp in the south in Sidon that was bombed by precision missiles from Israeli aircraft. Now, this was claimed by Israel to be a Hamas center in this refugee camp. The reality is very different. So the Israeli military spokesperson, Avichai Adre, claimed that the attack targeted a Hamas training compound, if we could just have this on the screen, where militants were preparing to carry out terrorist operations. In fact, it was a sports field within the refugee camp. 15 civilians were killed, many of them young teenagers who were playing football at the time. And there were dozens of injuries in the attack, all of them Palestinian refugees. At the same time, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has said humanitarian considerations no longer apply to Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, holding the government responsible for what he described as terrorist camps inside areas classified as refugee camps. He added that Israeli forces had been given orders to neutralize them. So now, with the passing of this resolution, Israel expands its attacks on Palestinians in diaspora.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for that. Okay, let's move on then. Let's move on to the latest in Lebanon, Vanessa.
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting because she mentioned 9/11 victims, so they were also dismissed by Trump's comment. Yes, so Lebanon, this is also an interesting development, very much connected to what's just happened in the UN. The US cancels Lebanon army chief's trip as frustration grows over the Hezbollah disarmament. This is Rodolphe Heikel, the head of the Lebanese armed forces that, of course, are sponsored by the US in order to not be able to defend Lebanon against Israel. And in fact, he made a statement which effectively blamed Israel for the ongoing more than 5,200 violations of the ceasefire that came into effect in November 2024. And of course, this set off a flurry of commentary on X. This is Lindsey Graham, the dreadful Lindsey Graham. It is clear that the Lebanese chief head of defense, because of a reference to Israel as the enemy and his weak, almost non-existent effort to disarm Hezbollah, is a giant setback for efforts to move Lebanon forward. This combination makes the Lebanese armed forces not a very good investment for America. I mean, just extraordinary language here. He was responded to by someone from the region who said the Lebanese army has never been an investment for the United States. Its support for the army, which isn't enough to arm a gang stealing candy, has always been a pretext to interfere in Lebanon's defense affairs. If you want to assess the United States investments, you can count the Lebanese children who were killed by American bombs, American planes, American cover, and Israeli hands. Very much a comment that reflects the opinion of the majority of people here in Lebanon. And then this was Tom Harb again, who reposted Lindsey Graham's post saying, "Thank you, Senator Lindsey Graham, for taking notice of the Lebanese army's behavior and the Lebanese government's unwillingness to take action against Hezbollah and to implement a UNSC 1559, instead just blaming Israel. I mean, how dare they? You have made the right decision by cancelling the meeting with the head of the army, General Rudolf Heikel. Our tax money must provide a return on investment in Lebanon. Hopefully, the president will read Trump administration very well and replace the head of the army with someone willing to get the job done soon." So this is extraordinary. This is a direct threat against the head of the Lebanese forces. Sovereignty goes out of the window. Of course, not that we ever expected it to be a consideration of the US or the UK at any point. But just to reinforce what Heikel actually said this morning, there was a terrorist Israel attack that struck a civilian vehicle in the town of Al-Tari Bint, Jebel district, South Lebanon this morning, causing multiple casualties, among them school children who were riding in a bus directly behind the targeted car. The attack once again highlights Israel's blatant disregard for the rights of children and for its utmost disrespect of any ceasefire agreement. So, I mean, just extraordinary events really here in this region.
Thanks.